My name is Evelyn. I'm 62 years old, and I always believed that family was forever, until the day my son Michael raised his hand to me, not once, not twice, but 14 times. Each strike was accompanied by the laughter of his wife, Jessica. What they couldn't imagine was that the house where they humiliated me was still in my name, and that my revenge wouldn't be served with screams, but with the ice-cold silence of legal documents. But before we go on, check if you're already subscribed to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching this from. We love to see how far our stories travel. I can still feel the burn of that night as if it were yesterday. It was a typical Sunday. The kind when families get together for dinner. I had prepared the pot roast Michael had adored since he was a boy, the one with extra gravy he always asked for on his birthday. It was as if time hadn't passed. I still saw him as my little boy, despite his 40 years and the increasingly harsh expression he'd adopted lately. Jessica arrived first, her strong perfume always giving me a headache. She gave me that smile that never reached her eyes and placed a bottle of cheap wine on the table. "For my dear mother-in-law," she said, knowing full well I didn't drink because of my blood pressure medication. I thanked her anyway, as I always did to keep the peace. Michael arrived half an hour later, already agitated. I could tell by the way he threw his keys on the table and by the brusque way he greeted me. Something at work must have gone wrong, I thought. I didn't ask. I already knew his fits of rage when he was contradicted. We sat at the table, and I served the food in silence. It was then that I commented, without much thought, that the loose floorboard in the kitchen was creaking again and needed to be fixed. "The floorboard in my house, you mean?" he replied, emphasizing the word as if he needed to remind me that I lived there out of his kindness. But the truth was different. The house had been bought with the money from the sale of the apartment where I had lived for 30 years after my husband passed away. At the time, Michael said it would be better to put everything in his name for tax purposes. Since I trusted him, I signed a private transfer agreement, but I kept the original deed in my name. "It's just a floorboard, son," I replied in a low voice. That's when he slammed his fist on the table, making the cutlery jump. "You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can tell me what to do in my own house?" Jessica smiled discreetly behind her napkin, her eyes shining with that morbid satisfaction she always showed when there was tension between Michael and me. "Have you forgotten that I took you in when no one else wanted you?" he continued, standing up. "Have you forgotten you could be in a nursing home right now?" I remained silent, my eyes fixed on my still full plate. The pot roast I had prepared with so much love now seemed like a tasteless lump, as heavy as the air around us. "Look at me when I'm talking to you," he shouted, grabbing my chin with force to lift my face. That's when it happened. The first slap came as a shock, not so much for the pain, but for the surprise. Never in his entire life had my son raised a hand to me. I felt my cheek burn as tears welled up in my eyes. Jessica gasped theatrically, covering her mouth with her hand, but her eyes were smiling. She was enjoying the show. "Michael, please," I whispered. The second blow was harder, and then came the third, and the fourth. I lost count after the 10th. My ears were ringing, and my entire face was on fire. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. I remained seated, straight as a board, while my own son unleashed his rage on me. When he finally stopped, he was panting. I looked at him, not recognizing the man in front of me. Where was the boy who held my hand to cross the street? Where was the teenager who brought me flowers picked from the neighbor's garden on Mother's Day? "This is so you learn to respect who's in charge here," he said, adjusting his shirt as if he had just closed an important business deal. Jessica was smiling openly now, not even bothering to hide it. I stood up in silence, leaving the plate untouched, and walked slowly to my room at the back of the house. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and finally let the tears fall. But they weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of a decision crystallizing in my heart like ice on a winter night. As I touched my swollen face, I remembered the dresser drawer where I kept the original deed to the house, the document that proved that, Legally, this place was still mine. Michael had convinced me to transfer the property to his name, but we never completed the legal process. He only had a private contract with no real legal value. That night, as I listened to their laughter from the living room as if nothing had happened, I pulled the deed from the drawer and placed it in a folder. In the morning, when they left for work, I would visit my old friend Arthur, a retired lawyer who still had connections in the legal world. I went to bed fully dressed, unable to sleep well. The hours dragged on as I planned every step of what I would do. It wouldn't be a loud or violent revenge. It would be silent and final, like the ice that now occupied the place where maternal love once existed. When the sun rose, I heard Michael's footsteps in the hallway, then the sound of the shower, and finally the front door slamming shut. Jessica left soon after, the sound of her heels echoing through the empty house. I waited another half hour to make sure they wouldn't come back for something forgotten. I put the folder with the documents in my bag, put on my warmest coat, the one Michael called an old rag, and went out the back door. The day was cloudy and cold, as if the weather was conspiring with my mood. I walked 3 blocks to Arthur's house in a quiet Chicago neighborhood. He opened the door, still in his pajamas, but his expression changed when he saw my swollen face. "Evelyn, my God, what happened to you?" "I need your help, Arthur," I said simply, entering as he made way for me. "I need to sell a house." Arthur served me coffee while he examined the documents I had brought. His eyes went from the paper to my swollen face, connecting the dots without me needing to explain everything in detail. He was a smart man and had known my late husband. "The deed is in your name," he confirmed, adjusting his glasses. "Michael never registered the transfer with the county. Legally, the house is still yours, Evelyn." I felt a cold relief wash over me. "So I can sell it?" "Yes, you can," Arthur replied, putting his cup on the table. "But are you sure about this? He's your son, after all." I lightly touched my swollen cheek. "A son who did this in my own house, in front of his wife, who laughed at me, I'm sure, Arthur." He nodded gravely. "I know a couple who are looking for a house in that area, in a wealthy suburb. They can pay cash and close the deal quickly if that's what you want." "That's exactly what I want," I replied. "I want everything done while they're at work. I want Michael to come home today and find strangers living there." Arthur hesitated. "Evelyn, this is fair," I completed. "It's fair, Arthur. I'm not asking for anything more than what is rightfully mine." He didn't argue further. Instead, he picked up the phone and started making calls. First to the interested couple, then to a notary friend of his downtown, then to a moving company. As I watched him organize everything, I felt light for the first time in years. Before noon, I was signing the sale papers at a notary's office in the heart of Chicago. The buying couple, the Hamiltons, seemed kind and excited about the sudden purchase. They didn't ask about the strange circumstances, perhaps because the discount on the price was too attractive to raise questions. "You can move in today," I said, handing them the keys. "The house is furnished, but you can do whatever you want with the furniture. I don't want anything from that place." Mrs. Hamilton took my hands in hers. "Thank you for selling us your house. We've always dreamed of living in that neighborhood." I didn't have the heart to tell her that place was no longer a dream for me, but a nightmare. I simply smiled and wished them happiness. Arthur accompanied me to the bank to deposit the money from the sale. "What are you going to do now, Evelyn? Where are you going to live?" "I have a friend in Traverse City who always offered me a room. I'll stay with her for a while until I decide what to do with the money. Maybe I'll buy a small apartment for myself." In reality, I already knew exactly what I would do. Part of the money would be donated to an institution that housed women victims of domestic violence. The rest would buy a small ranch on the outskirts of rural Wisconsin, where I could have the peace I so deserved after decades of caring for others. As we walked, Arthur suddenly stopped. "Evelyn, aren't you going to get your personal things? Clothes, documents, photos?" I shook my head. "I took what was essential last night. The rest, they're just things. I can buy others." The truth is, I didn't want anything that reminded me of that life. Not even the pictures of Michael as a child. The boy smiling in the photographs had died a long time ago, replaced by the man who raised a hand against his own mother. By noon, the moving trucks were already at the house. Loading the Hamiltons' furniture, Arthur had explained the situation to them, asking for discretion. They agreed to finish the move before 6 in the evening, the time Michael usually returned from work. I didn't go there to watch. I didn't want to see that house ever again. Instead, I took a taxi to the bus station and bought a ticket to Traverse City. While waiting for the bus, I sent a message to my friend Claire, letting her know I was on my way. "Did something happen, Evelyn?" she replied almost immediately. "I'll tell you when I get there," I typed. But yes, a lot has happened. As I sat on the waiting bench, I imagined Michael coming home, inserting his key into the lock only to find it no longer worked. I visualized his face upon finding strangers in his living room, the panic in his eyes as he realized he no longer had a place to call his own. Should I feel guilty? Maybe. But every time that guilt threatened to surface, I touched my still sore face and remembered Jessica's laughter. No, there was no room for guilt, only for the cold justice I had served. The bus arrived and I boarded with only a small suitcase containing a few changes of clothes and the now canceled deed to the house. When the engine started and we began to move away from the city, I felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. My phone began ringing incessantly 2 hours later. Michael, Jessica, Michael again. I could imagine the chaos they were living through. I turned the device off and looked out the window, watching the landscape gradually shift from urban to rural. Claire was waiting for me at the Traverse City bus station with a tight hug. Upon seeing my face, she gasped, "My God, Evelyn, who did this to you?" "My son," I replied simply, finally allowing myself to cry in the arms of my friend of decades. "But it's over now." She took me to her house on the outskirts of the small city, a cozy place with a view of mountains that seemed to embrace the horizon. We sat on her balcony with cups of hot tea while I told her everything that had happened. "You sold the house while they were at work?" Claire asked, incredulous. I nodded. "The house was mine. It always was. Michael just thought it was his." Claire shook her head, impressed. "And now? What are you going to do?" I looked at the distant mountains, feeling a peace I hadn't experienced in years. "I'm going to start over, Claire. At 62, I'm going to start over." That night, I briefly turned on my phone to check the time and found dozens of missed calls and messages. Most were from Michael, alternating between desperate pleas and furious threats. Some were from Jessica, accusing me of ruining their lives. There were also messages from unknown numbers, probably lawyers they had hastily hired. One message, in particular, caught my attention. It was from Arthur. "It's done, Evelyn. The Hamiltons are settled in and have changed the locks." Michael showed up screaming, but they called the police. "Everything is legally protected. Rest in peace." It wasn't a rest in peace of death, but of life. A new life that I would build from the ashes of the old one. I turned off the phone again and looked at the stars dotting the Traverse City sky. For the first time in a long time, I felt I could breathe completely. The mountain air filled my lungs like a promise of freedom. The first few days at Claire's house were strange. I would wake up startled in the middle of the night, confused about where I was, my heart racing as I remembered the events. Sometimes I would instinctively touch my face as if I could still feel the mark of Michael's blows. The swelling had gone down, but the memory remained as vivid as an open wound. Claire noticed my restlessness. One morning, while we were having coffee on the balcony, she took my hand. "You did what you had to do, Evelyn. Don't carry guilt for it." "It's not guilt," I replied, watching a hummingbird visit the garden flowers. "It's strangeness. For 40 years, I was Michael's mother. I built my life around that. And now you're just Evelyn," Claire completed with a kind smile. "Evelyn, who can do whatever she wants, without answering to anyone." There was a frightening freedom in those words. Who was Evelyn without the role of the self-sacrificing mother? Who was I, apart from the woman who had dedicated her life to her son? In the second week, I decided to turn on the phone to check my bank account. The money from the house sale was already available, a considerable amount that would give me comfort for the next few years. There were more messages from Michael, but the tone had changed. Now he was pleading. He said it had been a mistake, that he was sorry, that Jessica had left him. The last messages were almost incoherent, mixing rage and desperation. One of them made me pause. "I'm sleeping in my car, Mom. I have nowhere to go. Please forgive me." I felt a pang in my chest, that maternal instinct that never completely disappears. For a moment, my fingers hovered over the keyboard about to reply. But then I remembered Jessica's laughter, the sound of his hand against my face, the humiliation I felt sitting at that table while they amused themselves with my pain. I turned off the phone without replying. The next day, we visited a local real estate agency. There was a small ranch for sale in the vicinity. Nothing too big, just a half-hectare plot with a modest house, some fruit trees, and a stream that ran through the back of the property. It was perfect. "Are you sure?" Claire asked when I expressed immediate interest. "Don't you want to think about it a little more?" "I've been thinking about this for years without knowing it," I replied with a certainty that surprised me. I always wanted a place like this, just mine, where I could plant my own vegetables and wake up to the sound of birds. We made the offer the same day. The owner, an elderly man who was moving to live with his daughter in the capital, accepted promptly. In a week, I would own my own piece of land in rural Wisconsin. While we waited for the paperwork to be finalized, I started buying the basics for my new life. Simple clothes, some kitchen utensils, seeds to plant. Claire accompanied me on the shopping trips, her enthusiasm almost as great as mine. "You're different," she commented, as we chose gardening tools. More alive. It was true. The stooped, silent woman who had lived in Michael's house, always trying to take up as little space as possible, was disappearing in her place. Someone I had forgotten existed was emerging. The Evelyn who made plans, who smiled without fear, who chose for herself. 2 days before the move to the ranch, a strange car stopped in front of Claire's house. My heart froze when I saw Michael get out of the vehicle. He was disheveled, with an unshaven beard and deep, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he had aged years in just a few weeks. "How did he find us?" I whispered to Claire, who was next to me at the window. "He must have called all your friends until he found out," she replied, squeezing my arm in solidarity. "Do you want me to kick him out?" I took a deep breath, feeling the initial fear give way to a cold calm. "No. I'm going to talk to him." Claire looked at me, surprised. "Are you sure? After what he did?" "Precisely because of that," I replied. "I need to close this chapter once and for all." I went out onto the porch as Michael approached slowly like a wounded animal. When he saw me, he stopped, uncertain. His eyes scanned my face where the last traces of the bruises were still visible. "Mom," he began. His voice choked. I raised my hand, interrupting him. "Don't call me that. You lost that right that night." He swallowed hard, his eyes filling with tears. "Please, let me explain. I was drunk. I was having problems at work. Jessica was pressuring me." 14 times, I said simply. "You hit me 14 times while your wife laughed. There's no explanation for that, Michael." He fell to his knees on the stone path, sobbing now. "I lost everything, Mom. Jessica left me. I'm sleeping in my car. My friends don't answer my calls. No one wants to help me." I watched him there, broken. The son I had raised, whom I had cradled in my arms when he had a fever, for whom I had sewn superhero costumes, whom I had taught to ride a bike, now reduced to a broken man, begging not for forgiveness, but for convenience. "What do you want, Michael?" I asked, my voice softer now, but no less firm. "I want to come back," he sobbed. "I want my life back. Please tell the new owners it was a mistake, that you couldn't sell the house." And there it was. It wasn't true repentance. It was just desperation to regain lost comfort. Not once did he mention my pain, my humiliation. It all came down to what he had lost. "I can't do that," I replied. "And even if I could, I wouldn't. The house is gone, Michael. Your old life is gone." He lifted his face, contorted by tears. "What am I going to do? Where am I going to live? You're 40 years old, you have a job and your health. You're going to do what many people do, start over, rent a small place, save, rebuild alone?" he asked, his voice almost childlike. "Yes, alone. Just like I'm doing at 62. Michael stood up slowly, wiping his face with his shirt sleeve. Something changed in his expression, the plea giving way to a contained rage. "You have no heart. A real mother would never do this to her own son. That might have hurt me weeks ago, but now it only confirmed that I had made the right decision. A real son would never do what you did. Goodbye, Michael." I turned to go inside, but his words stopped me. "This isn't over. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to prove you were sick when you signed those papers. I'm going to get back what's mine." I looked at him over my shoulder, feeling only a deep sadness. "The house was never yours, Michael. That was your mistake from the beginning." I went inside and closed the door, hearing his screams turn into increasingly desperate threats. Claire hugged me in silence as we listened to the car drive away with a screech, tires squealing on the asphalt. "Are you okay?" she asked after a while. Surprisingly, I was. The encounter I had so feared had happened, and instead of breaking me, it had confirmed my strength. Michael wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was just desperate for what he had lost. "I'm better than I imagined," I answered honestly. That night, I received a call from Arthur. "Evelyn, Michael came to see me. He's threatening to file a lawsuit. He has no case, does he?" I asked, feeling a slight tremor of concern. "Absolutely none," Arthur guaranteed. "The house was legally in your name. You were in full possession of your mental faculties when you sold it, and we have witnesses to the assault if necessary. He's bluffing out of desperation." "Thank you, Arthur, for everything. Just be careful, Evelyn. Desperate people can do reckless things." After the call, I thought about Arthur's words. Michael was hurt and humiliated, a dangerous combination for someone who had already shown a capacity for violence. But I would not live in fear. Not anymore. The move to the ranch happened on a sunny Thursday morning. The place was even more beautiful than I remembered. The house small but cozy, the sloping land that descended gently to the stream, the fruit trees laden with blossoms that promised abundance in the coming months. Claire insisted on spending the first few days with me, helping to arrange the few pieces of furniture I had bought and planting the first seeds in the vegetable garden we improvised. In the evenings, we sat on the porch in newly acquired rocking chairs, drinking chamomile tea and watching the fireflies dance among the trees. "It's strange," I commented on the third night. "I spent so much of my life taking care of others that now I almost feel guilty for taking care of just myself." Claire smiled. "You deserve it, Evelyn. You always deserved it." The day Claire went back to her house, I felt a lump in my chest. Was I really ready to live alone, far from everyone and everything? The ranch was a 20-minute drive from the nearest town, and I didn't have my own vehicle yet. "I'll be a phone call away," Claire guaranteed as she said goodbye, "and I'll come visit whenever I can. Besides, you'll meet the neighbors soon. They're good people out here in the Wisconsin countryside." When her car disappeared down the dirt road, I sat on the porch and surveyed my little kingdom. The loneliness I feared did not come. Instead, I felt a deep peace, as if I had finally found my place in the world. In the following weeks, I established a simple routine. I woke up at dawn. I made strong coffee and went to tend the garden before the heat of the day intensified. The first seedlings were already beginning to appear. Lettuce, carrots, tomatoes, aromatic herbs. Seeing these little lives growing under my care brought me a satisfaction I had never experienced. Afterward, I dedicated a few hours to exploring the land, discovering its secrets. I found an old mango tree hidden among other trees, a small stone bench near the stream that the previous owner must have built, and even a hummingbird nest in a flowering bush near the kitchen window. In the afternoons, I read the books I had always wanted to read but never had time for: novels, biographies, books on gardening and cooking. Or I just sat on the porch with my notebook, writing down thoughts, memories, plans for the future. It was like rediscovering a version of myself that had been silenced for decades. My nearest neighbors, the Fernandez family, came to introduce themselves after a week, a retired couple who grew coffee on a larger ranch a kilometer away. They brought homemade bread and jaboticaba jam as a welcome gift. "If you need anything, just shout," Mr. Fernandez said with a kind smile. Out here in the country, we look after each other. His wife invited me to a Sunday lunch, where I met other neighbors from the region. Simple, genuine people who welcomed me without asking questions about my past. It was refreshing to be just Ms. Evelyn from the new ranch, instead of Michael's mom or the lady who was assaulted by her son. One afternoon, while I was picking some herbs for dinner, I heard the sound of a car approaching. My heart instantly raced. Could it be Michael? Had he found my address? I dropped the basket of herbs and ran inside the house, nervously peeking through the window. It was just the mailman delivering a package Claire had sent. Flower seeds we couldn't find in the region. I breathed a sigh of relief, but I realized the fear was still there, hidden beneath the surface of my new life. That night, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, I reflected on that fear. I had rebuilt my life, found peace, and even a new community that welcomed me, but I was still startled by the sound of an unknown car. Did Michael still have that power over me? I decided I would not allow it. The next morning, I called Arthur. "I need to know how he is," I said bluntly, not out of motherly concern, but for my own peace of mind. Arthur was silent for a moment. He dropped the lawsuit, Evelyn. He consulted a few lawyers, and they all said the same thing. He had no case. From what I hear, he rented a small apartment in a suburb of Denver and is trying to get back on his feet. And Jessica? She went back to her parents in Phoenix, from what I heard. It seems the marriage was already on the rocks before this incident. The loss of the house was just the final push. I absorbed this information in silence. Michael was moving on, rebuilding his life as I had told him to. For some reason, this brought me relief. Not because I was concerned for his well-being, but because it meant he had less reason to try to find me. "Thanks, Arthur. That's what I needed to know." "Evelyn," he said before I hung up. "Are you happy there?" The question took me by surprise. Happy? It was a word I hadn't used in so long that I had almost forgotten its meaning. "I'm at peace," I finally replied. "And I think for me, that is happiness." As the months passed, my small ranch flourished. The garden was already producing enough vegetables, not only for my own consumption, but also to trade with neighbors for other items: fresh eggs, homemade bread, milk. The fruit trees began to bear their first fruits, and I learned to make jams and compotes with Mrs. Fernandez. I bought a few chickens to have fresh eggs, and a dog, a caramel-colored mutt, who appeared on the road one day and decided my yard would be his new home. I named him Buddy because he jumped for joy when he saw me coming with his food. One morning, I received an unexpected visit. It was Claire, accompanied by an older lady I didn't recognize at first. "Evelyn, this is Matilda," Claire introduced. "She runs the shelter for women victims of violence in the city." Only then did I remember I had donated a significant portion of the money from the house sale to that institution without revealing my identity. Matilda took my hands in hers. "I came personally to thank you. Your donation allowed us to repair the roof that was collapsing and buy new beds for the children." A lump formed in my throat. "You don't have to thank me. I just hope it helps other women find the strength I took so long to find." "You are an example for all of us," Matilda said with teary eyes. "Claire told me your story. What you did requires a courage that few have. I didn't consider myself brave. I had only done what was necessary to survive. But seeing the gratitude in that woman's eyes, I realized my story could mean something to other people besides myself. That same day, after the visitors left, I sat at the kitchen table and began to write not a simple entry in my journal, but the beginning of a book. My story, told not with anger or bitterness, but as a testimony that it's never too late to start over, to demand respect, to find peace. I wrote every night for weeks, the words flowing like the stream that crossed my property, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, but always moving forward. I wrote about the blows, about the humiliation, about the sale of the house, about my rebirth on the ranch. I wrote without reservation, putting on paper pains I had never shared with him. When I finished the manuscript, I sent it to Claire, who showed it to a friend who worked at a small publishing house. To my surprise, they were interested in publishing it. "Your story can help other women find their own strength," the editor said over the phone, "especially older women who believe they are trapped in abusive situations." The launch of the book, Starting Over at 60, took place in a small bookstore in the city 6 months later. I was nervous, unsure if I had done the right thing by exposing my life so openly. What if Michael read it? What if he tried to stop me? But when I saw the room full of women, some young, some middle-aged, many older like me, I realized that my story no longer belonged only to me. It was a beacon for others who were still lost in the darkness I knew so well. "How did you find the courage?" a lady asked during the book signing, her trembling hands holding my book. I thought for a moment before answering. It wasn't courage I found first. It was dignity. The courage came later, when I realized I deserved more than what I was getting. She nodded with tears in her eyes and whispered a thank you that carried the weight of decades of silence. At the end of the event, as the bookstore was nearly empty, I noticed a man standing near the door. My heart skipped a beat when I recognized Michael Thinner, older, watching me from a distance with an expression I couldn't decipher. Our eyes met across the nearly empty bookstore. Michael didn't approach. He just stood there, a statue near the door. I felt my body tense, instinctively preparing for a confrontation. Claire, who was beside me organizing the unsold books, noticed my tension. "Is that him?" she whispered, following my gaze. I nodded slightly, unable to look away from the man I once called my son. He looked different, not just thinner, but somehow diminished, as if he had shrunk inside his own clothes. The air of arrogance that always accompanied him was gone. "Do you want me to ask him to leave?" Claire offered, her tone protective. "No," I replied, surprised by my own calmness. "It's all right." I stood up and walked slowly toward him, feeling strangely powerful in my new dress, a gift I had bought for myself with the first advance from the book. Michael remained motionless, his eyes recording my every step as if he were seeing a ghost. I stopped a few feet from him, maintaining a safe distance. Not out of fear, I realized, but by choice, out of respect for my own boundaries. "Hello, Michael," I said simply. He swallowed, his eyes scanning my face, my posture, as if trying to reconcile the confident woman before him with the submissive mother. "He knew you're different," he finally commented, his voice low and uncertain. "I am," I confirmed. There was no need to explain further. He was holding a copy of my book. I noticed the edges were already slightly bent, as if it had been read several times. "I came to give you this," he said, holding out a white envelope. "It's not much, but it's what I can afford now." I looked at the envelope without taking it. "What is this?" "Money," he replied. "Still holding out the envelope I started saving after I read your book. A little each month. To pay you back for the house." The surprise left me momentarily speechless. Of all the things I imagined Michael might want, this had never crossed my mind. "I don't need your money," I finally replied. "I know," he said, lowering his hand with the envelope, "but I need to pay you. Please." There was something in his voice, not manipulation or self-pity, but a genuine need. I realized it wasn't about the money itself. It was about acknowledgement, about taking responsibility. "What do you really want, Michael?" I asked directly. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at me, his eyes surprisingly clear. "I want to say that I read your book 3 times. I want to say that you were right to do what you did. I want to say that I'm sorry. Not for losing the house, but for what I did to you, for the slaps, for the humiliation." He paused, taking a deep breath. "And I want to say that I understand if you never forgive me." I hadn't prepared for this. I had imagined Michael furious, threatening, perhaps even vengeful, or pathetic, begging for help. But not this. This sober, reflective version that seemed to have truly understood the weight of his actions. "Where are you living now?" I asked, changing the subject as I processed his words. "I rented a small apartment near work," he replied. "Nothing special, but it's what I can afford. Here in Denver and Jessica?" A sad smile appeared on his face. She left when she realized there was no big house or comfortable bank account anymore. It was the best thing that could have happened, actually. We were silent for a moment. Claire kept her distance, but I could feel her watchful gaze, ready to intervene if necessary. "Your book?" Michael continued, lifting the copy slightly. "It's powerful. It hurt to read. It hurt a lot. But I needed it. I had never seen things from your side before." "Most abusers don't," I replied, surprised by the analytical coldness in my voice. "It wasn't cruelty, just an observation." "I know I don't deserve anything from you," he said, his voice failing. "I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be a better person. I'm attending a group for men with a history of violence. I'm learning." I looked at him, really looked at him, beyond the familiar figure of my son, beyond the good and bad memories. I saw just a middle-aged man trying to rebuild himself from the rubble of his own mistakes. "Not so different from what I had done myself. I'm glad you're seeking help," I said sincerely. "It's the first step." He nodded, still holding the envelope. "I still want you to take this. Not for you, but for me. I need to start repairing what I did somehow." I thought for a moment and had an idea. There's a shelter for women victims of violence in the city. It's called New Beginnings. Make your donation there. His eyes widened slightly in understanding. "That's where you donated part of the money from the house, right? It's in the book." I nodded. "They need it more than I do." He put the envelope in his pocket, accepting my suggestion. "I'll do that tomorrow." Another silence, less tense this time. "Your ranch? It sounds like a nice place," he commented, referring to the descriptions in the book. "You seem happy there." "I am," I confirmed. "I found my place. I'd like to—" He began, hesitant. "No, forget it." "What?" "Nothing." I have no right to ask for anything. I understood what he meant, even without him finishing the sentence. He wanted to visit me, see where I lived, maybe try to rebuild some kind of relationship, but he was right. It was too soon. Maybe it always would be. "I need to go," he said finally, sensing my silence. "I just wanted to see you and tell you this in person. Your book is going to help a lot of people. You're stronger than I ever imagined." It was the most sincere thing Michael had ever said to me in his entire adult life. Not a manipulation or a compliment to get something in return. Just a simple truth, offered without expectations. "Thank you for coming," I replied, "surprising us both, and good luck with your recovery." He nodded, an almost imperceptible movement, and then turned to leave. At the door, he stopped and looked back one last time. "Mom. Evelyn, I'm truly sorry." And then he was gone, leaving only the chime of the bookstore door tinkling softly behind him. Elena came over immediately. "Are you okay? What did he want?" I took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of emotions I couldn't name. It wasn't forgiveness. It was too soon for that. It wasn't reconciliation. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. It was something more subtle, more complex. "He wanted to acknowledge what he did," I replied finally. And I think he also needed to see that I'm okay. And are you? Elena asked, searching for signs of distress on my face. I thought about my current life, the peaceful ranch with the murmuring stream, the chickens scratching happily in the yard, Buddy, who greeted me every morning with boundless enthusiasm, the shared meals with neighbors, the quiet nights writing by the light of a table lamp. I'm better than I've ever been, I answered honestly. That night back at the ranch, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the stars. Buddy slept at my feet, snoring softly. The encounter with Michael had stirred up feelings I thought I had buried, but not in the way I feared. I realized I didn't hate my son, nor did I love him as I once had. That love had been burned along with my dignity on that fateful night. What I felt was something closer to distant compassion, the kind of feeling one has for a stranger trying to fix their life after a big mistake. I took my notebook and began to write. Not for a new book, but for myself. I wrote about the encounter, about the words exchanged, about the diminished man Michael had become. I wrote about the strange sense of closure that conversation had brought. When I finished, I closed the notebook and breathed in the pure night air. The scent of jasmine blooming near the porch filled my lungs. I was at peace, not because of Michael's repentance, but in spite of it. My happiness no longer depended on his approval, his love, or his acknowledgement. It was entirely mine. The spring arrived at the ranch with an explosion of colors and scents. The jaboticaba tree near the house was filled with small, shiny black fruits. The orange trees were covered in fragrant white blossoms, and the garden thrived with lush vegetables. I woke up every day to the sound of birds and fell asleep to the croaking of frogs by the stream. My book had gained unexpected traction. I started receiving letters from readers, mostly older women who, like me, had endured abuse for years, convinced it was too late to change. Some wrote that my story had given them the courage to leave toxic relationships. Others, that they had confronted adult children who mistreated them. Each letter filled me with an emotion I had never experienced before, a sense of greater purpose that transcended my own journey. One morning, I received a call from Matilda, the director of the women's shelter Evelyn. We have a delicate situation here. A 72-year-old lady arrived yesterday after fleeing her son, who kept her practically under house arrest. She is very fragile and scared. She read your book and insists on talking to you. I know it's a lot to ask, but... I'll be there today, I replied without hesitation. I asked Mr. Fernandez for a ride, as he was going to the city that afternoon. The shelter was in a renovated old mansion with a cozy garden at the entrance. Matilda greeted me at the door with a hug. She's in the back room, she explained as she led me through the corridors. Her name is Eleanor. She was a teacher before she retired. Her son took complete control of her pension and isolated her from all her friends. She escaped when he went to work. We stopped in front of a simple door, painted a soft yellow. Matilda knocked lightly. Miss Eleanor, Evelyn is here to see you. I entered the modest but comfortable room alone. Sitting in an armchair near the window was a small, fragile lady with carefully coiffed white hair. Her bony hands held my book, the pages visibly worn from so many readings. When she saw me, her eyes lit up. Is it really you, the author? I smiled, sitting in the chair next to her. It's me. Matilda told me you wanted to meet me. She took my hands with surprising strength. Your book saved my life, you know? I read it in secret when Augustus was out. Each page gave me a little more courage. My eyes welled up as she told her story. The small abuses that escalated over the years. The way her son controlled every aspect of her life. From the clothes she wore to what she ate. The growing isolation. The constant fear. When I read about how you sold the house and rebuilt your life, I thought, if she could do it at 60, I can do it at 72, Eleanor said, her eyes shining with newfound determination. Yesterday, I finally had the courage. I took only my documents and a change of clothes. I walked 4 blocks to find a taxi. The driver brought me straight here. You were very brave, I said sincerely. She shook her head. Not as brave as you. I just ran away. You fought back. You made him pay for what he did. Each of us finds our own path to freedom, I replied. The important thing is to take the first step. We spent the afternoon talking. Eleanor had been a literature teacher for 40 years before her son convinced her to sell her house and move in with him after her husband's death. What began as a seemingly normal cohabitation soon turned into absolute control. The money from the sale of my house disappeared. She said Augustus said he was investing it for me, but I never saw a cent. When I started to question him, he became aggressive. First, it was just yelling, then pushing, until one day he locked me in my room for calling an old colleague. It was a story I knew all too well, not just from my own experience, but from the dozens of letters I had received since the book was published. The pattern was always the same: isolation, financial control, intimidation, violence. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. A determined smile appeared on her wrinkled face. "I'm going to sue Augustus to get my money back. Matilda has already put me in touch with a lawyer who works pro bono for the shelter. And then, well, I've always wanted to live by the sea, maybe in Veracruz." Before I left, I promised to visit her again and keep in touch. I gave her my phone number and the address of the ranch, saying she would be welcome for a visit whenever she was ready. "You gave me more than a book," she said as we said goodbye. "You gave me a future." Back at the ranch, sitting in Mr. Fernandez's car, I was silent, reflecting on the encounter I had entered Eleanor's life through the pages of a book, and somehow that had changed the course of her existence. It was a responsibility I had never imagined. "Are you all right, Miss Evelyn?" Mr. Fernandez asked, noticing my silence. "Yes," I replied, looking out the window at the approaching mountains, signaling the proximity of home, just thinking about how life turns. The visits to the shelter became regular. Once a month, I went to the city to talk with the women seeking refuge there. Not just Eleanor, but others who arrived with equally painful stories. I didn't consider myself a counselor or therapist, just someone who could say, "I understand," and really mean it over time. Matilda suggested I formalize these visits as a support group. "The women open up to you in a different way," she explained. "You represent a real possibility of starting over, especially for the older ones." And so, Starting Together was born, a group that met bi-weekly at the shelter. There, women of all ages shared their stories, their fears, their small victories. I just moderated, offering my own experience when it seemed helpful. In one of these meetings, a young woman in her 20s raised a question that caught me off guard. "Ms. Evelyn, did you forgive your son?" The room fell silent. It was a question everyone wanted to ask, but no one had had the courage to. I thought about the encounter with Michael at the bookstore, about the letters he had sent since, respectful letters, with no demands, just updates on his life and his progress in therapy. Letters I read but rarely answered. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word," I answered honestly. "I understand that he's trying to change. I accept his apologies as genuine, but some breaks are permanent. What we had no longer exists and will never exist in the same way again. But do you still consider him your son?" The young woman insisted I took a deep breath. "Michael will always be biologically my son, but our relationship, if we ever have one again, will be completely different, based on mutual respect and clear boundaries, not on family obligations or automatic forgiveness. And is that enough for you?" I looked out the window at the shelter's garden where some children were playing, sons and daughters of women who had found the courage to break cycles of violence. "It's more than enough," I replied, "because my happiness no longer depends on him, it depends only on me." On the way back to the ranch that day, I stopped at the small town's central square to buy fruit. As I was picking out some apples, I heard someone call my name. It was Arthur, my old lawyer friend, who was passing through the region. "Evelyn, so good to see you," he exclaimed, approaching with a genuine smile. "You look radiant." We chatted for a few minutes, catching up on our lives. Arthur had fully retired and was now dedicating himself to painting, a youthful hobby he had abandoned for his legal career. "I spoke to Michael last week," he commented casually. "He called me to thank me for the advice I gave him when he wanted to sue you. He said it was the best thing I did for him, preventing him from making another mistake." I nodded, not quite sure what to say. It was strange to hear news of my son through third parties, as if he were just a distant acquaintance. "He's really trying, Evelyn," Arthur continued. "I'm not defending what he did. I never would. I just thought you'd like to know." "Thank you for telling me," I replied sincerely. "I hope he finds his way." As I drove back to the ranch, I thought about the strange web of connections life weaves. Michael, who had been the center of my universe for so long, was now a peripheral figure, and I, who had lived in the shadows for decades, was now at the center of a community of women who found strength in each other. The second anniversary of my move to the ranch arrived with the scent of orange blossoms. I decided to celebrate with a Sunday lunch, inviting the people who had become important in my new life. Claire, the Fernandez family, Matilda, some women from the support group who had already moved on, including Eleanor, who now lived in a small apartment by the sea as she had dreamed. The Sunday morning dawned perfect. Blue sky, pleasant temperature, a light breeze rustling the leaves of the trees. I woke up early to prepare the house and cook. I had planned a simple but cozy menu: rice, beans, a ranch chicken and sauce with potatoes from my garden, a fresh green salad, and for dessert, a corn cake with a niece that my mother used to make. While I cooked, Buddy dozed lazily near the stove, occasionally opening one eye to see if any piece of food would accidentally fall for him. The house was immaculate, not luxurious, but cozy and genuinely mine. On the walls, I had framed some watercolors I started painting in recent months, encouraged by Claire. They weren't masterpieces, but they captured the simple beauty of my little paradise: the stream, the trees, the sunrise seen from the porch. The guests began to arrive around noon. Claire was the first, bringing a key lime pie as a contribution. The Fernandez family came right after. With a bottle of the special coffee they produced, Matilda arrived with two women from the shelter I hadn't met yet, introducing them warmly. Eleanor appeared accompanied by a childhood friend she had reconnected with after decades of forced separation. We set up a large table on the porch, covering it with a colorful embroidered tablecloth I had bought at the city market. Conversations flowed naturally, laughter echoed through the property, stories were shared without haste. I watched that diverse group gathered at my house. People I didn't even know 2 years ago, but who were now an integral part of my daily life. After lunch, as we were serving coffee, I heard the sound of a car approaching on the dirt road. I wasn't expecting anyone else. All the guests exchanged curious glances. "Are you expecting someone else, Evelyn?" Claire asked. "No," I replied, getting up to see who it was. My heart sped up when I recognized the car parking under the shade of a mango tree. It was Michael, alone. A tense silence fell over the table. Claire moved closer to me protectively. "Do you want me to ask him to leave?" she whispered. I looked at my guests, people who knew my story, who knew who Michael was and what he had done. Some looked worried, others curious. Eleanor had a particularly tense expression, perhaps reliving her own traumas. "No," I finally replied. "I'll talk to him." I walked to the car with firm steps. Michael got out hesitantly, wearing a simple shirt and jeans. He looked nervous, holding a small package in his hands. "Sorry to show up unannounced," he said as I approached. I called several times, but no one answered. "We're having lunch?" I explained, gesturing to the table on the porch. "It's the 2-year anniversary of my move here." He looked at the guests, who made no effort to hide that they were watching our interaction. "I didn't know you had visitors. Can I come back another day?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes, come back another day. Or better yet, never come back. But another part, a part that surprised me, wanted to close this chapter once and for all. "What do you want, Michael?" I asked directly. He held out the small package. I brought you this. It's your 62nd birthday next week. I didn't want to let it pass unnoticed. I was surprised he remembered the date. In the last few years living in his house, my birthday rarely received more than a hastily murmured happy birthday. Thank you, I said, a little stunned. An awkward silence settled between us. Michael looked at his feet, then at the house. The land, anywhere but my eyes. Your ranch is nice, he finally commented, exactly as you described it in the book. It's my home now, I replied. He nodded. You look well. Happy I am, I confirmed. More silence. Behind me, I could feel the attentive gazes of my guests, especially Claire, always protective. Michael, I have guests, I said gently but firmly. Why don't you tell me what really brought you here? He took a deep breath, finally meeting my gaze. I'm moving south, to Tuxtla Gutierrez. I got a job there. I leave next week. The news caught me off guard. Oh, is that good for you? I think so, he replied. It's a new beginning, away from the memories, from the people who knew the man I was. He paused, swallowing hard. I needed to see you before I left, to tell you in person that I'm still sorry, that your book changed my life as much as yours, that I understand now what I did, even if it took me too long. His words were sincere, I realized. There was no manipulation or self-pity in them, just the raw simplicity of the truth. I hope you find what you're looking for there, I answered honestly. Michael glanced at the porch, where my friends were trying to disguise their attentive observation. You've built a beautiful life here. New people, new purpose. He smiled sadly. I'm happy for you, really. In that moment, I felt something shift within me. It wasn't forgiveness. Some wounds are too deep to ever fully heal. It was more like letting go of a burden I didn't even know I was still carrying. Michael no longer had power over my happiness or my peace. He was just a person from my past who was following his path, just as I had followed mine. Thank you for coming to say goodbye, I said, and good luck in Tuxtla Gutierrez. He nodded, seeming to understand that this was the closure we both needed. No emotional hugs, no promises of reconciliation, just a mutual, respectful acknowledgement of our separate paths. Goodbye, Evelyn, he said, using my name instead of Mom. A small gesture that showed an understanding of the new boundaries. Goodbye, Michael. He got in the car and drove slowly down the dirt road, raising a small cloud of dust behind him. I stood there, watching until the vehicle disappeared around the bend, the small gift still in my hands. When I returned to the porch, everyone was looking at me with expressions ranging from concern to curiosity. Claire was the first to speak. Are you okay? Surprisingly, I was. Better than I ever imagined possible. Yes, I replied, taking my seat at the table. He came to say goodbye. He's moving south. And that's the end? Eleanor asked softly, her wise eyes reading beyond my words. I thought for a moment before answering. I think it's a fitting end, not dramatic, not cinematic, just enough. There were understanding nods around the table. Many of those people had lived their own closures, some complete, others partial, all necessary to move on. What did he bring you? Claire asked, pointing to the package I had placed on the table. I don't know, I replied, starting to carefully unwrap it. Inside was a small carved wooden box, simple but beautiful. Opening it, I found a delicate gold locket that I recognized immediately. It had belonged to my grandmother, then my mother, and finally, me. I thought it had been lost during the hasty move from Michael's house. I found it among the things left behind, said the small note next to the locket. I know how much it means to you. I'm sorry for everything. I touched the locket gently, feeling its familiar, cool texture against my fingers. It was more than an object. It was a piece of my history, a connection to the strong women who came before me, women whose lives I never fully knew, whose struggles probably resembled mine in ways I would never know. It was my grandmother's, I explained to the guests. I thought I had lost it forever. How wonderful that it came back to you, Mrs. Fernandez commented gently. I put the locket on. In a way, it was symbolic. The time that had been interrupted was now flowing again, marking not just hours and minutes, but the continuity of life with all its breaks and imperfect repairs. The rest of the afternoon passed in a lighter atmosphere. Michael's unexpected visit, instead of spoiling the celebration, had added a note of closure I didn't even know I needed. The conversations flowed again, the laughter returned, and as the sun began to set, coloring the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt complete in a way I couldn't explain. After the last guest left, I sat alone on the porch with Buddy sleeping at my feet. My grandmother's locket shone softly in the lantern light, marking time with its steady, comforting tick-tock. Thinking about the 2 years that had passed, I realized how far I had come from that terrible night at Michael's house. The woman who trembled under her son's blows, who cowered at her daughter-in-law's malicious laughter, who accepted humiliation in silence, she had transformed into someone I barely recognized, not because this new version of me was a stranger, but because she was who I was always meant to be. At 62, I had rebuilt not just a life, but an identity based not on sacrifice, but on self-respect, not on family obligations, but on conscious choices and healthy boundaries. I had discovered that it's never too late to say no to disrespect, no to violence, no to relationships that diminish rather than elevate. And perhaps most importantly, I had discovered that it's never too late to say yes to yourself. The sun disappeared completely over the horizon, leaving only a final golden halo of light. I got up, called Buddy, and went into the house I had made truly my own. Tomorrow would be another day in my new life. A life I had conquered not just by surviving the blows, but by finding the courage to respond to them not with more violence, but with a cold, precise determination that changed everything. As I got ready for bed, I thought about the word re-beginning, the title of my book, the theme of the support group, the essence of my journey. Starting over didn't mean erasing the past or pretending the wounds never existed. It meant building something new and better on the scars, using them as a foundation rather than letting them be prisons. Michael was starting over in Tuxtla Gutierrez. Eleanor was starting over by the sea in Veracruz. Other women were starting over in the shelter, in small city apartments, in the new relationships they were building. And me, I had started over here, among orange and jaboticaba trees, with a caramel-colored dog and a murmuring stream, surrounded by people who saw me for who I was, not for what they could extract from me. Time had taught me that revenge doesn't need to be loud or violent to be effective. Sometimes the best response to cruelty is simply to refuse to be diminished by it, to build a life so full and joyful that those who tried to break you become irrelevant, not out of hatred, but out of growth. This was my truth at 62, that life can bloom more beautifully after a devastating storm, that the strongest roots often grow in soil that has been completely turned over, that it is never, ever too late to say, "This life is mine." And for any woman listening to my story, whether she's young or old, trapped in an abusive relationship, or just starting to see the warning signs, my message is clear. You deserve respect. You deserve peace. You deserve a life that is truly your own. And if I, at 60, could find the courage to start over after decades of submission, you can too. No matter your age, your financial situation, your fears. The first step is the hardest, but every step after that becomes a little easier, until one day you find yourself dancing toward a freedom you never knew existed. Now, if you enjoyed this story, click subscribe, and tell me in the comments which part left you speechless. Oh, and don't forget to become a member to get access to exclusive videos I don't post here. I'll see you there.